Now, as the Donald Trump administration continues its crackdown on activists across college campuses in the United States, an Indian national and Georgetown University postdoctoral fellow by the name of Badr Khan Suri has been arrested over allegations of spreading anti-Semitism and ties to Hamas. Suri was arrested by federal agents outside his Virginia home on Monday, right after being informed that his visa was being revoked. His lawyer has confirmed that Suri is awaiting an immigration court date. Now, the Trump administration cited a rarely used immigration law that allows the Secretary of State to deport non-citizens deemed a threat to U.S. foreign policy. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has determined that Suri's actions made him deportable. Suri's plea argues that he has no criminal record and has been targeted due to his wife's Palestinian roots. It is pertinent to know that his wife is the daughter of longtime Hamas leader Ahmed Yusuf. Remember, this incident follows the recent self-deportation of another PhD student, Ranjini Srinivasan, who was accused of anti-Semitism. The U.S. Department of State cancelled her visa on the 5th of March, citing security concerns related to her involvement in her alleged activities supporting Hamas. Now, both cases have raised alarms about academic freedom and the targeting of students based on the political beliefs and backgrounds. Civil rights groups criticize the administration's actions as politically motivated and lacking substantial evidence. These incidents reflect a significant shift in the U.S. immigration policy concerning foreign students engaged in political activism related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let me go across to my guests who are joining me at this point here. I'm joined by Rashmi Sawant, who is, of course, a very prominent student leader, someone who has also been at the receiving end of censorship as well. And let me just get details about our guest team at this, guest joining me. I'm also being joined by Syed Fazal Kashani, who's a political analyst and a former student leader. I'm also being joined by Prabhu Dayal, who's a former ambassador. Thank you all for joining me on this important discussion. Let me begin with you, Syed Fazal Kashani, since you're also a former student leader. On the face of it, why should the U.S. government not reserve the right to deport students who it feels are supporting a terrorist group like the Hamas? That's the most basic question. Let's start with that.
No, there has to be a distinction between supporting Hamas and being pro-Palestine. The U.S. Home Department, as per their convenience, they can't label these students pro-Hamas, whereas they have been pro-Palestine supporters. Secondly, I think United States is a democratic state, and the law prevails there. So, given the cases where they are labeling them as pro-Hamas supporters, the law should take its action. It's not the U.S. Home Department, but judiciary. They should be given a chance to prove their innocence in the court of law. You cannot simply tag them and label them as pro-Hamas and deport them. It clearly shows, it is very evident what stand the US has taken when it comes to Palestine and Israel war. It clearly shows which side they are on. And when we talk about Palestine, it's a humanitarian cause. It's not. We have seen the ethnic cleansing happening there. We have seen small children being killed. Even after ceasefire was announced, they were stopped of the basic medical supplies in Hamas. So it is very important for the Home Department of US to give these students a fair chance to prove their innocence and let the law take its order.
Okay, Rashmi Samant, you have been on the receiving end of what you have called is censorship on college campuses here. What we are seeing is perhaps the accusation is this is censorship and cracking down of dissent of the opposite kind. Are we not setting a very dangerous precedent that if one supports a Palestinian cause, one is automatically labeled a Hamas sympathizer? There are serious allegations coming in, both in the case of Ranjini Srinivasan and also in the case of this researcher named Badr Khan Suri, that the due process of the law was not followed. There was no chance given to either for the prosecutor to establish concrete links to Hamas rather than just being a supporter of the Palestinian cause. And before there has been any chance of a hearing, their visas have been cancelled and they're either been arrested or been forced to deport. Is this not a very worrying trend that's developing on college campuses in the United States?
Well, I wouldn't want to mix what I faced with what's currently happening in America because these are two separate issues. What I faced was, due to bias against my heritage and so on and so forth, stemming from a student election. Here, the entire issue is about supporting Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that the student in question here, Badr, his wife happens to be the daughter of Ahmed Yusuf, who was a senior political advisor to the Hamas leadership. I mean, when such concrete links do exist, you cannot hide under the garb of academic freedom of speech to perpetuate any and all crimes that you want to while masquerading as an academician. I think that is extremely dangerous. Yes, academia does deserve freedom of speech, does deserve a degree of autonomy in terms of putting their ideas out, but too much freedom and too much autonomy to do whatever they want to, including questioning the integrity of the very country that they live in, or going against the foreign policy, regime set by their own country, I think is extremely dangerous. We've seen dangerous trends where academia is being weaponized, student protests are being weaponized, as long as they're restricted to campus issues and issues facing the country, I think that's all right. But the minute it starts getting weaponized to, make other students also feel insecure and unsafe on campuses, because we're talking about Columbia and universities as such, where other Jewish students were made to feel insecure. They were attacked, in fact, and heckled for having alternative opinion. Then why shouldn't such protest, which is actually now raising risks and concerns over the safety and autonomy of other students, be not curtailed by the government? I think the government has equal responsibility towards all of its students. So you cannot conflate all kinds of student protests under one umbrella. There are some protests which come with certain intentions, which come with certain agenda, which come with a certain kind of funding, and they cannot be excused for every child that they that was killed in Palestine. Children were also killed in Israel. There is a one-sided sort of a demonstration that undermines the October 7 attack that happened on Israel, where children were killed, women were raped, and brutality was unleashed. The so-called, activists for Palestine have not once, disowned or distanced themselves from what happened on October 7. They haven't, they haven't called it out. The so-called activist here, the so-called student who's being, deported, not once have called off or called out or disowned his father-in-law, who is the political advisor to Hamas, which is a known terrorist
No,
organization
the
that has
problem,
spread havoc.
the question I have, Rashmi Sawant, is where does one draw the line between supporting the Palestinian cause? And even though one supports the Palestinian cause, doesn't necessarily mean one is ignorant to the atrocities suffered in the Israeli side by the Jews. But where does one draw the line between supporting the Palestinian cause and between being an active supporter of the Hamas? Now, from what I understand,
The line
being
is
married to a
very
relative of someone who's part of a Hamas leadership doesn't naturally doesn't naturally mean that you are a terrorist yourself or
when
you are a
when
Hamas
you say
sympathizer
relative,
yourself.
you're actually putting distance. She's the daughter of the leader of one of the highest leaders of Hamas, and they have not once disowned the relative. This is not a
But the
relative,
individual arrested is
father-daughter
not. But the individual arrested is not a
relationship.
blood relative, Rashmi.
But it is the same family, and they haven't once disowned Hamas or distanced themselves from the relative. I think people who are within this framework need to distance themselves and actively disown. The line is terrorism. The day they call out terrorism and then go about the Palestinian movement, that's the day when you differentiate between the two. But the
Okay.
lines have always been blurred, and the so-called activists have always played on blurring these lines. Not one of the deported activists have actively called out the terrorism that Hamas has perpetuating. Then where does one see what the intentions are, because they're not clear about their intentions. Many of these protests have have raised pro Hamas boards and signs and slogans, and not once is this being called into question. Hamas is, by the end of a day, a terrorist organization. I studied at the University of Oxford. So did Osama bin Laden. That does not mean that academicians have some sort of a magical freedom to do whatever they want to do. Terrorism is the line you draw. Terrorism is not acceptable, even if it is being propagated as an academic idea
Okay.
or as a right to, freedom of expression. I think killing people, the kind of brutality that was unleashed on October 7th, not having the capacity to call that out, whilst pushing one single sided narrative, that is extremely dangerous to civil society. And the fact that that is being perpetuated on a university campus where all sides need to be heard in an equivocal manner is disturbing, because the day these activists took to the streets over a year ago, that was the day when Jewish students were heckled. Jewish students and faculty were made to feel like they didn't belong on campus. Their protest was in fact attacked by the same protest. So, I mean, you need to look at this in a holistic manner, in the way that
Okay.
there has been terrorism on the other side, and how people have suffered on the other side as well, and their students as well. They also have the right to study at
Okay.
these
So I'm going to give.
universities.
So, point taken, Rashmi. I'm going to get Syed to respond to that. Ambassador Dayal, I'll just beg your indulgence for about 2 minutes because I want this debate to go on before I'll come to you. So, if I could just take 5 more minutes of your time, Ambassador Dayal. Syed, respond to the point Rashmi Sawant is making, that free speech does not include openly supporting terrorist groups. That is a line which every political establishment reserves the right to draw. And in this case, it's just Donald Trump's administration drawing the line.
No, just because one thing is there, just because the father-in-law of this student has been a former advisor to Hamas, does not mean that he is, related, or he is committed to the ideologies of Hamas. A person can speak for himself, and if he is talking for Palestinians, he should be dealt with the law, not by the force. I mean, the way they have tried to deport him and then arrested him. So this shouldn't be the course. I mean, if he is proven guilty, then law will take its own course. Secondly, it's very unfortunate how Rashmi is trying to justify the killings. Like, let's get on the numbers. You have seen how many, like, thousands of kids, thousands of people get killed on the name of countering Hamas in Palestine. You cannot justify. I mean, for me, what Israel is doing is also an act of terrorism. The United Nations have condemned it. So many countries have condemned it. Let's talk on the facts. I mean, I condemn each and every killing that has happened. I condemn the killing that has happened, Israeli people who have been killed. But at the same time, let's see the numbers. If you compare the killings, you see who is unleashing terror on Palestine. I mean, it is very unfortunate that she's trying to justify. Secondly, all I'm trying to say is,
Okay.
if this student leader, or if this student is proven guilty, let the law take its own course. Let he be punished under the law of United States, but it shouldn't be imposed. The deportation shouldn't be imposed on it. He was arrested, and after arrest, he was told the cause of his arrest. I mean, this is very unfortunate.
No, but every
So
country has
in
the
this
right to
case,
deport someone who's been accused
United
of
States is
wrongful
a
activity.
democratic country. They claim to be
Why
a
should
democratic.
someone be arrested and not be deposed? If you have been arrested, which means you've been accused of breaking the law, a country has the right to deport you. Ambassador Dayal, I'll come in on this. The reason why reason why we need your insight on this topic, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, is this: this is now a tricky situation for India diplomatically. Whether it be the case of Ranjini Srinivasan, whether it be the case of this student, Dr. Suri, these are ultimately Indian nationals. If they get deported, as in the case of Ranjini, they come back to India. Now, whether they are terrorist sympathizers or whether they're Indian nationals who have been accused of, who are accusing the Trump administration of having the right to free speech curtailed and their academic work disrupted, both ways, it's an important problem for India. How does India move on this case diplomatically?
Well, first of all, let me say a few words about this particular case, and then I will make some general comments which will answer your questions relating to India's diplomatic position. Now, this case is sub judice. The matter is in court. The Department of Homeland Security will present certain arguments for his deportation, and his lawyer will present arguments, and has already done so, in fact, stating why he should not be deported. So in my view, when a matter is in court, when it is sub judice, I will not comment anything in regard to the legal aspects. Let the court decide. We are in no position to prejudge what the court has to say. Now, secondly, as regards the larger issue which you have raised, let me mention that international students in any country are advised to take care in order to ensure that their student visa status does not get disturbed. When I was Consul General in New York, I was regularly interacting with the students who lived in the 12 states that I had under my consular jurisdiction. These included Connecticut, of course, New York State, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, where so many of the Ivy League colleges are situated. Plus, there were a whole host of other institutions where there were a large number of Indian students. And my advice to them always was, please don't do anything which jeopardizes your visa status. You're here as a student, you're not here as an activist. So every particular student who is in a foreign country must exercise due care not to get into any sort of trouble. This was always my constant advice, and I stand by that advice. In view of this, the government of India
you mentioned...
hold on. The government of India cannot intervene in this case. It is a matter for the courts of the United States to decide, and they will decide as per the circumstances and the prevailing law.
No, but Ambassador Dayal, that's the point. You mentioned that this case is sub judice. That is exactly a concern. While this case is sub judice, the statement has already come in from Tricia McLaurin saying that that Dr. Suri's views make him deportable. So there seems to be a case of judge jury execution already happening in Donald Trump's administration, which is why the concern. Similarly, with the case was the other student who was forced to self-deport, Ranjani Srinivasan. She has come out and said that she never really supported, she was wrongly accused of supporting the Hamas. She just aired views of pro-Palestine. Now, firstly, we know, Ambassador Dayal, as much, you know as much as I, that college campuses, whether it be in the United States, whether it be in the European Union, whether it be in India as well, college campuses have always been centers of political activism. We cannot separate politics from college campuses across the world. Secondly, if a student says that she has just supported the Palestinian cause, something which even India has, I mean, India's already diplomatic stand official is that it is in favor of both the Israeli and the Palestinian people, can that person then be wrongly accused of being a supporter of a terrorist group and then be deported without any legal recourse being given? Isn't that a concern for India?
Well, first of all, let me refer to this case of Ranjani Srinivasan. She self-deported herself because now she has the right to appeal through a US court against the cancellation of her student visa. Her student visa had been cancelled. She decided to self-deport. Now she can challenge the cancellation in a US court. Whether she will do so or not is up to her. Secondly, you're right. Campuses are very political. There are protests. Students are activists. But there's a difference between being in a campus in your own country and being on a campus in a foreign country. The advice which you are indirectly giving to Indian students who are abroad is extremely dangerous. We cannot, when we are abroad, take part in political activities or protests or side with one point of view or another which is political, because this could jeopardize our student visa status. Please believe me, these are not the first cases when student visas have been cancelled. There have been a whole host of earlier cases all over the world pertaining to foreign students where student visas have been cancelled and students have been deported. There is nothing that the government of the country from which that particular student comes which can be done by that country in favor of getting his visa status reinstated. It is entirely up to the host country. And therefore, in this particular case, the matter is in court. You said the courts have said something. No, the courts have not pronounced a judgment. Let the court pronounce the judgment. Then we will know what the court has to say. But since the matter is still to be decided by the court, I repeat what I said earlier, it is sub judice.
All right, Rashmi Sawant, I'll come to you for the last word. Do you think that this is a national pushback coming from the fact that, as scholars, you have several times repeated in the past, a lot of these institutes of higher learning in the so-called liberal centers of the United States or Europe have essentially become leftist bastions, which are by default supporting terrorist outfits such as the Hamas, and which is why now they have naturally become put at loggerheads with a conservative government such as that of Donald Trump?
Well, I think it's true. And when I think the whole communistic movement was thrown out of Russia and China, when the middle class rejected it, it came to university campuses. And definitely it has pushed for a political regime and political structure within society that is anti-conservative across the world. You can see this. You can see this in India. You can see this in Germany, in Europe, in United Kingdom, in America. So definitely, the political dispensation that is conservative is going to be against a system that is actively trying to establish a separate political ecosystem. And I am sympathetic with them because a university campus shouldn't be weaponized to the extent that it affects regime change. Because a university campus is a place where everybody should have the liberty.
Do you see the problem with your words, Rashmi? You said that an alternative political ecosystem which is being propped up by a university will be at loggerheads with the ruling establishment. The same can happen tomorrow in a so-called left-leaning or liberal country where there's a right-wing student movement that is flourishing. And once again, the cause comes in as to point as to what line do we draw between student activism, which is not necessarily a bad thing. This logic of students being students and not being political activists doesn't work. Some of our top leaders have started off as student politicians or student leaders. Where do we draw the line between student activism and open support for terrorists? That's the debate that goes on. Rashmi Sawant, thank you so much for joining me. Also, thank you, Syed Fazal Kashani, for joining us with the views, and Ambassador, always a pleasure to have you. It's time for a short commercial, but more news and updates continue on the other side. Stay tuned to Mirror Now.